This is Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Kosmographia podcast. I am Russ. This is my brother Kyle. We are the Snake Bros. We are here with Brad and normal guy Mike and Randall, of course. How's it going, guys?
Wonderful today.
Quite well. Thank you.
Beautiful day in Georgia today. Couldn't have been nicer.
It was a beautiful day.
It was a beautiful day in North Carolina, I guess.
Yeah, I'm up by Asheville. Yeah, absolutely. Got out and did some yard work.
All right.
Probably the last day we're going to get.
Did you guys get a note of that? Brad was out doing yard work today.
Wow. That's like a once a year thing, right? Pretty much.
End of the year. It's like I don't think I'm going to have to do it anymore after today. That was kind of the goal.
It's your end of the year lawn mowing activity there.
When it gets 70 degrees, it's like okay, I'm going to have to do it one last time. Yep. Yeah, so I was mowing the lawn exactly.
All right.
Now, before we jump into the continuing topic we were talking about, I wanted to read one of the reviews we got on Apple Podcasts, Randall.
Sure.
It's from listener Yaya6363. It says, continuing education. As someone who has heard Randall Carlson through various other podcasts and videos, this is amazing. Getting to ride along as Randall deep dives into topics with the wealth of information he has acquired through years of study is like skipping K through 12 and going straight to college with a tutor that teaches the class walking beside you on your journey. Awesome topics and information. Keep it coming. So I just thought that was a great review. Yeah.
Well, that's the plan. Yeah.
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 That's the plan. Yeah.
Welcome to Randall's stream of consciousness.
You darn tootin'. That's the plan. What? Don't make fun of me because I'm from Minnesota. You think just because I'm from Minnesota, I talk funny?
Doesn't take you long to get it back, right? We go up to Minnesota and you picked it right back up.
Well, no, then I moved down to Georgia. Pretty soon I'm talking like this. I done moved down to Georgia and I got me a Southern accent.
Yeah.
That is possibly the worst imitation Southern accent I've heard in years.
Whoa.
Listen, the point is, listen, I've been working with guys, Mike, that talk like that. So, and here's the point. It's when you put those two together, this distinctive, articulate voice that I now have.
Jesse Ventura sounding guy.
That's how you get this perfect diction, is you put those two together. And out of that comes perfection.
Out of chaos comes order.
That's the whole idea.
Randall Carlson.
Yeah.
Welcome to Randall's stream of consciousness.
Right. Northern hick plus Southern hick makes Randall. Is that what you're saying?
In a manner of speaking.
Hick perfection. Okay. Oxymoron.
Hick, listen. I don't make fun of hicks.
No, yeah.
Hey, we're hillbillies, man.
Yeah,
I
we
know,
are.
because
Straight up.
right. I mean, I was going to say, look, I'm not making too much fun of you two.
We are the butt of all jokes here. I mean, that's
right.
just expected.
That's pretty much our job.
Well, 90%.
I mean, what? Southwest Texas, that kind of qualifies as hicks, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, of course. So,
Yeah. I mean, the richest family in our town, the people that like own everything and run everything, are called the Hicks. So.
oh, they are.
There you go.
They're going to think that's funny.
I know they love this podcast and they're going to laugh at that. So, yeah. What's up, Hicks, brothers, peoples?
Well,
Yeah.
anyways,
I would just encourage anybody who's listening to go to Apple iTunes and look up the podcast and give us reviews. That always helps getting the podcast up in the charts. So thanks for the reviews. There's lots of other good ones there. So
And
that's it.
and we are prone to straying from the rails. So the straight and narrow right down the path. Yeah, we're not going there.
well, it's been known to happen.
Yeah, that's all right.
And will again.
And it will again.
This podcast is interrupted by a catastrophe. We're just staying true to the model here.
Yeah.
Hey, there's some big fires in California, so catastrophe's going on right now for some people's lives.
Yeah.
And there's also how many people now without power because Pacific Gas and Electric has shut the power down on a couple of million people or something. I haven't.
Yeah, they've been doing rolling blackouts. Yeah.
Yeah, rolling blackouts.
With some kind of heavy metal band.
Oh. Yeah.
That's the name of a heavy metal band?
I haven't heard that.
I just heard the rolling blackouts were in California, and I was just like, it must be some heavy metal band.
Heavy metal band is touring.
Okay. So we were talking about mass extinctions last week. We were talking about Pleistocene megafauna, if memory serves me correct.
Definitely we were.
We were talking about some of the unique circumstances under which these extinct mammalian fauna were found, raising questions about the exact mechanism by which they disappeared from the entire planet, basically. Did they disappear all at once? Was it a gradual thing? Was it a stepwise extinction? Was it a pulsed extinction? These are questions which are still being asked, and we don't have definitive answers on those yet. Although I am inclined at this point to think that it was not one fell swoop that took him down, but it was several blows. Just using again the mixed martial arts metaphor. When you see a couple of UFC fighters going to it, you'll see one of them. Sometimes guy might come out and do a spinning rear kick and get the guy in the head, and in the first 13 seconds, and he falls down unconscious, and that's the end of the fight. The other might take 5 rounds of wearing him down before you finally knock him out, right? Well, I think it's probably somewhere in between those two. We've got a series of events that have sort of knocked the biosphere out of kilter and set up the process of destabilizing the dominant ecotones, if you want to call it that, and eventually led to the loss of species. And then you could have a cascading effect. But I would definitely say that the evidence is overwhelmingly in favor of the idea that it was catastrophic. Maybe not that it was one catastrophe that did the whole work all at once, but a succession. I think it's a succession of catastrophes might be a more accurate way of explaining it over a period of perhaps 2,000 to 3,000 years. The culmination of those was then the collapse of the old dominant biological order of things and its replacement by basically the Holocene biome that we've essentially still living in today. But it's interesting because, the mystery is still, how do you get from having half of North America, subject to a polar climate, whose only modern analog now is the South Pole, right? Because that's what it was. I mean, you had a polar climate like the South Pole. The unglaciated parts of North America, for example, from Kentucky northward, was basically tundra. And the southern United States was boreal forests, spruce trees, larch trees, alder trees, the kind of forests that you would now find up around the Great Lakes and northward, see? And that's what you had in the South. It was completely different. And then, as we've talked about repeatedly over these episodes, is the importance of the rising and falling sea levels. And with Brad's graphic up, it immediately brings that to mind, because what we're looking at there is global coastlines as they would look when sea levels were 350 feet lower, which means that actually this is, in a sense, kind of a conservative map, because we know that at the extreme, it was at least 400 feet lower. It may have been, according to some studies, as much as 450 or 460 feet lower. Although I think kind of the consensus lowering that they've converged on is about 400 feet. Although interesting studies which would suggest that it might have actually been 450 feet. So if you drop the sea level another 50 or 100 feet, then you've regressed coastlines. You've regressed sea shores even further seaward, which exposes more land. And I found a number that I had been looking for, which was somewhere I think between 4 and 5 million square miles of land was drowned with the rising sea levels, somewhere around this. So in the ballpark, the same amount of land that was released with the melting away of the glaciers. In other words, obviously nothing was happening in Canada when it's buried under thousands of feet of glacial ice. You know, there's no agriculture going on there. There's nothing going on there. I mean, it's a vast sheet of ice from the Atlantic to the Pacific and from the northern United States up to the Arctic Circle. And that's all gone now for the most part, except for a few residual ice caps, the biggest of which, of course, is Greenland. But the point is that it's still very difficult, if not impossible. I'll say not impossible because there is an explanation there somewhere of how you get from that order of things to what it is now over a period of a few thousand years. And I say a few thousand. The global warming began around 15,000 years ago. And we've talked about the sequence, how it began to gradually warm. The ice caps begin to shrink back. And this is probably when this ice-free corridor opened up. And if we look here up on the map that Brad has as a background, that ice-free corridor was right down here to the east of the Rocky Mountain front. And that would have allowed yeah, there we go, right there. Yep.
Good job, Brad.
Doppelganger, man, is learning it out there. Yeah.
All reversed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we figured this last time. It's 110 meters down, so you said that was 360.8 feet. And this map is from NOAA, which is National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, and the National Geophysical Data Center, which has now changed their name. But yeah, I've got a link to this in the description if people want to see this online. It's pretty detailed and really fascinating to look at.
Oh yeah, you'll get hours of enjoyment looking at this. And one of the things about it is you can really begin to see, true, authentic, legitimately accepted sunken land masses. They're not really sunken land masses; they're drowned land masses. The two being, Indochina down here, the Sunda land, and Beringia, which is the area, linking North America to Siberia, up by Alaska. Those are two of the most prominent pre-flood landscapes that existed during the Ice Age period, during the Pleistocene, that are now under 100 to 400 feet of water.
Did you want to share a screen there?
I've got a number of screens to share, but I wasn't quite ready to yet.
Okay.
Unless you had something.
No, I mean, I can switch what's behind me, but I thought maybe you were going to pull something up there. So yeah.
Can you switch it over to Beringia?
It'll take me a minute, but yeah.
That is a beautiful map, though.
Oh, and it's awesomely good map. I love that map. Of course, I love maps in general. I am what you would call and Brad is as well,
Big time.
Cartophile.
Cartophile.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
We love maps.
Maps fascinating, yes.
Aren't they, though?
So the Beringia thing, that there was supposed to be, this is the infamous or famous land bridge, right?
Yes.
But the problem with it isn't there a problem with it in terms of like people or animals crossing, in that most of the time that it was above sea level, it was also covered in ice. So there was this sort of tiny window where the ice had receded far enough for there to be actual places for people to walk, but the sea level
interestingly, Beringia was not covered in ice.
Oh, okay.
It was not covered in ice. In fact, it was a vast fertile grassland, a sort of a savanna, that supported huge numbers of Pleistocene mammals.
Okay. But wasn't there like an ice wall there? Wasn't the Cordilleran ice sheet blocking the way or something?
Let's pause for just a moment. We got to get this right.
Okay.
Cordilleran.
Cordilleran.
Yeah, and in fact, I've been berated by some of the older videos that Brad posted from like 20 years ago. I'm butchering a few of the words.
Yeah.
So I've gotten some flack for that. One guy was saying, "Listen, he butchered this word, so don't listen to anything else he says."
Right.
That seems to be a commonality among you geniuses, though. I mean, I watched something the other day that was highly recommended, and it was about the mass extinction time, and the guy called it not a caricature, but a caricature. So
A caricature.
yeah, I've never heard it that way. You know, like you say, havoc. You know, which is a nice Swedish Viking thing to say. I mean, we talked about that before, which I like. But I mean, people pick on you about saying havoc, which is cool. But this guy said caricature, so it's like, okay, well, you know, there's something about saying things differently. I don't know why you read it that way, but you know, it's not. It's the norm for you geniuses.
Well, for anybody who's thinking further about, you know, lobbing barbs at me for my pronunciation of havoc, let's be clear. This is how Minnesota Hicks say the word, okay? This is how we say the word.
And they're descendants of the Vikings, so they should know.
That's exactly
right. They know how to say it.
we look, we're the ones who created the damn word, okay?
That's right. If they're going to create some havoc, they're going to create some havoc, and they're going to do it the way they want to.
The way we want to. That's right.
That's
right. Can you find it at IKEA?
Well, Mike, how do normal people say that word?
Havoc.
Havoc. See,
havoc.
What a wimpy. I mean, havoc. I'm going to go out and commit havoc. No, it's havoc.
Fuck.
Havoc.
Fuck you.
Hey, Brad.
I bought a nice four-drawer teal blue havoc at IKEA.
Okay, so now we've settled that. Let's move on. So hopefully from now on there will be no more comments about my pronunciation of the word havoc. Havoc. Jeez. Is that how you say it if you're from Connecticut? No, listen, I'm not casting aspersions on Connecticut. I've been through there. It's a lovely state.
Lovely.
No emails, please.
Okay. In fact, we need to actually do a exploration of the Connecticut River because guess what the Connecticut River has? It preserves evidence of catastrophic meltwater floods, of course. Yeah.
Of course.
As does the Hudson. And we haven't really done those traverses yet, but those are two. There's some old geological reports from the 40s and 50s talking about the massive extinct waterfall cataract on the Connecticut River. So I've got that on my list at some point when we get back up in those areas, because we're planning at some point to do a traverse of the Hudson River, because that's a spectacular valley that was carved first by glaciers, then by copious meltwater. And of course that was the inspiration behind the Hudson River School of mid-19th century artists, which you guys familiar with the Hudson River School?
Yep.
We'll share. I know you are, Mike. What about you, West Texas Hicks?
Nope.
No. Okay. Well, you've just confirmed your Hicksterdom there. The Hudson River School, I'll digress for a minute because these guys were great. There was a school of art in the mid-19th century, and what these guys did is they were very much inspired by the landscapes around them, and they had a very spiritual relationship with the landscapes, but they knew that these landscapes were beginning to undergo a massive transformation. And so what they did was they set out with their art to attempt to capture this essence that they were experiencing within these landscapes while it still existed. And I know you've seen Hudson River School art. You just don't connect it with the name.
Yeah, they were the first great American naturalist painters.
Yes, thank you, Mike. They were the first great American naturalist painters.
They captured landscapes up and down the Hudson River Valley, hence the name of the Hudson River School. But it's early landscapes of the American, what was at the time the American northeastern frontier. Beautiful stuff.
Right. Yeah, and their work, I've loved the work of the Hudson River School since I was a kid, basically.
Yeah.
Maybe a little later I'll pull some up because I use some of their work sometimes because it really does suggest this really intimate relationship with the landscape that that motivated and inspired these people. I will just go ahead and pull up a couple while we're at it here so you can see, and then you'll instantly recognize the work, I think, once you see it. Okay, we'll go to here. And
as you might imagine, I got thousands of maps here, so I'm not finding that right away. I've been sorting out my files and deloading my hard drive, so I can't find that right away. But
we'll excuse you.
I know you've got something comparable, and it'll come up soon.
Wow.
Yeah, this is Albert Bierstadt. Now, of course, this is not the Hudson River, but the style of painting grew beyond. It had its germinus in the Hudson River Valley, but then it expanded beyond. I mean, some of these guys like Asher Durand and Frederick Church actually went to Europe, went to South America, and painted in that style, this kind of almost monumental style.
These canvases are massive. The Bierstadt campus, go back to the Bierstadt.
Yeah.
That Bierstadt canvas, that thing is huge. It's like 10 by 12 feet or something like that. It's massive and it's gorgeous. The detail is astounding.
The detail is truly astounding. I mean, you can zoom in.
And Bierstadt went out west and painted a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
His are primarily Western landscapes. But it's the Hudson River style of painting. It's very a lot of sunsets, a lot of natural, muted natural colors.
Yeah, and their depiction of light was really was really advanced for the time. Yeah, you look at this. This is Yosemite here, and this is again the light that you see. The like Mike said, the muted colors. So I've loved this, and in fact, I think even having. I'm not sure where, if we had paintings for these guys. I think we maybe had a book. But yeah, very early in life, I got interested in these, and I'm sure it inspired an interest in monumental landscapes.
That's the Hudson River School. Is that what you called it?
The Hudson River School, yes.
I'm going to remember that. That's beautiful stuff there.
Oh, it's awesome stuff. Frederick Church is probably the most well-known of that particular style of painting. And he was, let's see, Frederick Church. Here we go. Oh, yeah. I've used this one. I love this painting. This is Chimborazo. No, this is Cotopaxi, the volcano.
We're not seeing it sharing right now.
You will in a second.
Okay.
Here we go.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man.
Volcano's blowing off.
Yeah.
This was Frederick Church's studio, which is actually in the Hudson River Valley. I love that architecture there.
Oh, yeah.
And again, notice the way they handle light. So yeah, that's the Hudson River School. Now you know.
Now I know.
Okay, this is this is heart of the Andes. So again, some of them, like Frederick Church, traveled far afield from the Hudson River Valley itself, but brought that style of painting. Very naturalistic.
Oh yeah.
Great stuff. And like you guys didn't know about them. A lot of people don't know about them, and I don't know why that is. They seem to be more popular back when I was a kid because that's how I would have been exposed to them. But yeah, they were that kind of critical link between the sort of the wilderness that had prevailed in North America for 10,000 years and the encroachment of civilization. And they saw that beginning, that the civilization coming on, and they knew that it was going to transform the land. And so they set out, it was like a deliberate part of their philosophy that they set out to try to capture this sense of this landscape while it still existed before.
While it was still wild.
While it was still wild, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think they did quite an impressive job.
Yeah, looks like it.
Mm-hmm. So that was a little digression, but I think it was a valuable digression.
Cordilleran, is that how you say it?
Cordilleran. Cordilleran. Yeah. The L's are silent.
Okay.
But, here's the cool thing these days. What I do now is I will actually call up people and they say, how do you pronounce the name of your town? Or even easier is you can go online now and get the correct pronunciations of words.
Howtopronounce.com.
Yeah.
Exactly. How to pronounce that. Exactly. And
well, the double L is like a Y. That's what's been
it's a
come across
Spanish.
Cordilleran.
It's
Spanish. There you go. So yeah.
Cordilleran. Yeah,
double L is a Y.
But why?
Because they said so.
So going back to my question there, wasn't that quote unquote land bridge blocked by ice? It didn't provide access to North America until there was a very small window. Isn't that right? That's what I thought.
Pretty much. Yeah. But the blockage, I think didn't I have in this? Yeah, here we go. Let's go back to this graphic. We've looked at this, but it wouldn't hurt to look again because I think you'll see. Okay, so now here you can see the Cordilleran, which is pretty much covering Western Canada. It mostly is distributed over the Canadian Rockies, but notice here how it follows the coastline, mainly because you've got a lot of moisture feeding the growth of the ice sheets here. And you've got some mountain glaciers over this range of mountains here in northern Alaska, but otherwise Alaska is clear. A lot of the Yukon is clear. You'll see up here, this is Beringia, and you'll see that there's no ice.
Yeah.
Here is where the ice-free corridor was, right between these two ice sheets. And so what would have happened was, if you go back 26 to 30,000 years ago, the ice sheets were drastically reduced in size. In fact, there may have been no Cordilleran ice sheet at all, right? Mm-hmm. The Laurentide ice sheet might have been restricted to a couple of nucleation centers, one to the west and one to the east of Hudson Bay. Well, post 26 to 28,000 years ago, the ice sheets began to rapidly grow, and somewhere, presumably, and the dates I've seen vary quite widely, between 18 and, say, 22,000 years ago, both ice masses would have increased to the extent where they could coalesce. And at that time, any passageway through between them is going to get closed off. So at that point, when you would say at the LGM, the late glacial maximum, there was no ice-free corridor. Now, when the gradual warming kicks in at about 15,000 years ago and the ice sheets melt back, I think this would be the most current thinking about this, is that then the ice-free corridor opens up and would have allowed for a couple of thousand years the passageway of people or animals through there. And during the Ice Age, these unglaciated areas of Alaska were heavily populated with megafauna, as was the entire Beringia, this land that is now submerged, right? So then what would have happened is the catastrophic meltdown occurred, and you would have had massive floods that would have now used that ice-free corridor to channel down and ultimately lead into what is now the Missouri River Valley. See, if you continue this down, it heads in down here, what is now the Missouri River Valley. And so John Shaw labeled this the Athabasca flood. I believe it was John Shaw, the flood that left the big rocks, Okotoks, and the
Erratics train.
Thank you. The Foothills Erratics train that reaches from where the Athabasca River, I'll use the French term, debouches, because that's the word they use, where a river exits a mountain front and
from
opens
the mouth.
up from the mouth of the, yes, right. So you say that the river debouches onto the plain. And right there, where, what's that?
Debouché.
Debouché. That's probably how you say it.
So romantic.
For anybody out there who speaks French, I would like to get that pronunciation precisely correct.
I think debouche is probably correct.
Debouche.
Debouche.
Yeah, the E is silent on that.
Okay. Well, that's how I've been pronouncing it, and I know I've heard it pronounced, but years ago, and I don't quite remember, but I think it's debouche, and I don't use that word very often. because it just feels funny whenever I say the word. I don't know why.
It's naughty.
It's not debauchery. It's not debauch. It's debauch.
Debauch.
No, actually, I know a friend that had a dog, and its name was Bushy, the mouth, because it barked all the time. So the dog's name was Bushy for the debauch.
Debauch. So the mouth, but it's not really the mouth of the river. It's the mouth of where the river comes out of the mountain front.
There you go.
Right. So where it does that, the river keeps flowing to the east, but at that point, the great Athabasca River turned south and carried with it a lot of icebergs, and in these icebergs were embedded or carrying on top as cargo the great metaquartzite boulders that now form the Foothills erratic terrain, of which the biggest is the Okotoks just south of Calgary that weighs about 18,000 tons, which we visited multiple times now, and is a very impressive rock, I must say.
Very.
So that's that whole Erratics terrain pretty much defines this corridor between the two great ice sheets, and so back to your question, and the idea is that there might have been a couple of 1,000-year period where the ice had contracted enough that it opened up and now allowed a passageway through. And for a long time, the ice-free corridor idea was the dominant idea as to how non-glaciated North America down here became populated with humans. And it was presumed that these people that came down through this would have been the Clovis. And of course, this is connected with one of the dominant themes of what we're going to be talking about here in the next few minutes, and we're talking about last week, was the mechanism by which the megafaunal the great megafaunal animals went extinct. And of course, the dominant idea up to this point has been that they were hunted to extinction by Paleo-Indian immigrants who came over the Bering Land Bridge, came down through the ice-free corridor, presumably slaughtering every mega mammal that they encountered in their, not only the woolly mammoths, but 3 other species of proboscideans, the Mammothus imperator, Mammothus primigenius, the Mastodons, Mammut americanum, and then you get all of the rest of them. You get the giant ground sloths, you get the predators like the Ursus spalaeus, the cave bear, you get the Arctodus simus, the giant short-faced bear that we introduced to folks last week. The list goes on and on. Camels. You had very large camels that lived in North America during the Ice Age that stood up to 7 or 8 feet at the shoulders. Wow. Amazing species of camel that's now, of course, extinct. And of course, we saw last week that a number of paleontologists looking at this incredible fauna, diverse fauna that inhabited North America, said the only modern comparison would be like the Serengeti Plain of Africa, right? But yet you look there and you've only got 1 species of elephant. In North America, we basically had 4 species. So, it's amazing, and people do not really have the picture of that world. So that's part of what I think our objective here would be over this and maybe a couple more podcasts, is to try to recreate a picture of that world. And it may not be 100% accurate in every detail, obviously, but I think at this point we have enough data and enough information that we can reconstruct in pretty accurate detail what that world was like. And I think that's important to understand to understand that world in order to understand how it disappeared and how we get from that world to this world that saw the rise of civilization. When we go back to the first millennium or 2 or 3 coming out of the Ice Age, we find the beginnings of agriculture. We find dispersal of languages. We find domestication of animals. We find the first urban complexes. So why is it that you had humans, modern humans, with presumably similar intelligence to our own, based upon skeletal remains that would suggest that their cranial capacity was every bit as comparable to our own. Yet for 150 to 200,000 years, there was no accumulated knowledge that could lead to what we would think of as civilization. You know, why and how is it that you could have, when we look at how rapidly human population has grown over the past couple of centuries, once we got the Black Plague and the famines and things out of the way, which were a consequence of deteriorating climate, mostly cold and damp. Once we got those things out of the way, notice in the last couple of hundred years how exponentially population has taken off, population numbers. How is it that for all of those thousands and thousands of years, all of those millennia, population remained relatively stable at perhaps a few million to 10 million individuals worldwide? To me, that's a mystery. What was it? What was qualitatively different about the present that has allowed this rapid expansion of human population, and yet for 150 or 200,000 years, that never happened? Did it happen? So we don't know. What was the population? We know from scarce and very sparse, widely dispersed skeletal remains that modern humans were inhabiting the planet 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago. But it never seemed that they went beyond apparently a few million individuals. If they did, if they had reached the levels comparable to modern times, where you might have been talking about hundreds of millions or even a billion people, why would we not find more traces of their having existed? And could the population have reached hundreds of millions given the nomadic nature of the lifestyles, the hunter-gatherer lifestyles? Perhaps global climatic conditions during the Ice Age were not conducive to the establishment of civilization. What is the fundamental thing, Shiny Brothers, that you need to have to build a civilization? What is the foundation of it? What do you think?
I would say agriculture.
Exactly, agriculture. You got to have agriculture. That's the first thing. So is it possible that during the Ice Age, agriculture was extremely difficult, if not impossible? Yeah, I think that's possible, and we should look at that.
In some places, it might have been easy. You know,
yes.
I don't know.
And I think that's the whole point. One of the ideas we've been emphasizing through this series is that, yeah, maybe there were places where, because of the unique circumstances, were more benign, would have been susceptible to the growth of something that we might think of civilization. When we talk about the Minoans or the Phoenicians, we're not talking about, SUVs and intercontinental airplane flights or any of that. We're not talking about televisions or cell phones. We're talking about a maritime culture, right? Who's in its own way is sophisticated, but not to the level that we are today technologically, but we still call them a civilization. We would talk legitimately about the Minoan civilization. So
and I shouldn't have said it would be easy, because farming is never easy.
It's never easy.
That's right.
As a farmer, I can say it is not easy, even with all the equipment we have nowadays. So,
right. And growing up in rural Minnesota, yeah, I mean, I know that for a fact.
Yeah.
I mean, I worked on farms for 4 years during my teenage years, and I know how hard that work can be. Yeah.
So even if there were places that were conducive to farming, it's still not easy.
Yeah.
So
it's still not easy, right? And
serious.
And if we are to believe the proxy data about carbon dioxide concentrations, we're looking at and at some point we'll get into a more in-depth discussion about the carbon cycle and how it may have affected or been affected by the changes in climate that occur between glacial and interglacial ages. But if, let's say, we accept the proxy data, there would be times when carbon dioxide concentrations got below 200 parts per million.
Yeah.
And you know what happens then? I mean, most of our food crops are not going to require more than 200 parts per million to flourish.
Many plants are at that level, yeah.
Yeah, and so when you get down to 200 parts per million, you're getting really dangerously low. And which brings us to another interesting topic, is that if we look at the long term, the big picture of Earth history, we see that for 95% of Earth history, carbon dioxide concentrations have been higher than now, right? Sometimes way much higher, right? If you look at it in that context, and some of those that have been roundly, denigrated for saying such things, but have pointed out that we're in effect or have been in a CO2 drought for a lot of the Holocene. That 300, 200, see, pre-industrial carbon dioxide is about 280 parts per million. So 80 to 100 parts per million during the Ice Age low. And one reason that would be is because when the planet cools off and the ocean cools, it becomes a CO2 sink, and it starts sucking down all of the carbon dioxide. And, then when there's a warming again, it outgasses the CO2. So it's almost like there could be like this self-perpetuating feedback loop that once the planet succumbs to an ice age, there's a lot of forces that want to keep the planet in an ice age. Not the least of which, as you look at this graphic here, you've got 6 million square miles of white.
Right.
That's reflective. That right there substantially changes the planetary albedo right there. And so, we're reflecting a lot of heat back into space. And then the fact that down the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, then you're going to have, it's going to put stress on plants, particularly the kind of plants that would be food crops. So that might be part of it. I'm not saying that we've got it all figured out and this is the answer to it, but I think that's kind of the line of thinking that would be productive here to consider, that perhaps climatic conditions were such during the late Pleistocene that it just was not conducive to agriculture and subjected the human species to this kind of hunter-gatherer existence. And
Randall,
yeah, go ahead, Brad.
Sorry, man. While you're on that map there, sorry to interrupt you, but it's such a good map with the ice sheet there. I think that's from the National Forestry Service.
Yeah.
But just a couple places that we've been talking about this episode and the previous, I just thought it'd be good, since you got the pointer there, to show where the Scablands are, show where the drumlin fields in Wisconsin we were looking at are, so where the Illinois River is coming out of the south end of Lake Michigan lobe there. Just kind of identify some things that are worth looking at along the margin of the ice sheet there in North America and the United States specifically.
Sure. Yeah. Good idea. This is, and of course we don't really have enough detail here, but just generally within this box, which I also find maybe sort of appropriate that they put this box around this is the Lake Missoula Scablands flood area. And, generally the thing that I'm trying to get push the discussion past is this segregation of these different events that have occurred. And one of the things that, like Brad and I have been doing in our expeditions and research, is we've been exploring all along this southern margin here of the ice sheet. And everywhere, at every point along that margin, you'll find the evidence of these gigantic meltwater flows rushing off the ice sheets, right?
Gigantic.
Generally, in this case, gigantic, right? This is the area. So this right here would be the Columbia Basalt Plateau. And this was the scene of the Channel Scablands in eastern Washington that were studied famously by J. Harlan Bretz. When you go to the east of there, this blue right in here would be Glacial Lake Missoula, which is occupying mountain valleys of western Montana. And one of the great leap forwards in understanding these mega flood events at the end of the last ice age was the connecting of the research in the Lake Missoula Basin and the research in eastern Washington, and showing that they were linked, right? And we will be getting into that in considerable detail so that people really can get the sense of what that is, what the controversies are. And certainly there are controversies, and some of the ideas we're proposing are controversial. And we've already noticed that some of the defenders of the sort of the entrenched status quo ideas are already taking issue with some of the things that we've been some of the ideas that we've been expressing here. Interestingly, what I've seen is most of these attacks and criticisms are not really criticizing what we actually said, but what they're imagining we said, right? So, but then you come east of there, and all along here, you're going to find, like all across the Great Plains here, you're going to find this succession of these huge spillways where water gushed off and carved these tremendous valleys that now are basically conveying the much smaller modern rivers. I mentioned earlier that if you follow a flow of water down the ice-free corridor where it discharges from the mouth down here, leads directly into the headwaters of the Missouri River Valley. And then when you come over here, you get these two lobes, the Superior Lobe and the Michigan Lobe. And yes, there are all along here, there's evidences of these catastrophic outburst floods. You come over here, all along in here, you find the same thing. A lot of the waters discharging off of this lobe fed into the, it was all part of the catchment basin of what is now the Ohio River. And so there are numerous studies of the Ohio River that show that there were massive floods rushing through there, meltwater floods that in some cases were over 200 feet deeper than the modern flood level of the Ohio River. Then you come up here into the Northeast, and this is what we were talking about earlier with the Connecticut River and the Hudson River and the St. Lawrence Seaway, which discharged up through here, but you can't see it because it's under the ice. All of these river valleys show unambiguous evidence of gigantic current flows through them. What's interesting is a lot of the rivers that didn't necessarily head onto the ice sheets directly also have evidence of gigantic flows. And we're going to be getting into all of that down the road a little ways. So maybe this is just kind of an advanced preview of what we will be talking about, because we've got hundreds, if not thousands, of awesome graphics and images and stuff to share with people so that they can begin to get the picture here of what happened. The drumlin fields that Brad mentioned would be basically right under this lobe here. We've traversed these drumlin fields on our most recent passage. They're difficult to see because, they're forested. If you really want to see drumlins, you have to get to where they're not covered in trees. And again, we'll probably devote at least a whole episode to drumlins, because drumlins are one of the keys to deciphering these events that transpired 12, 13, 14,000 years ago, as we will be demonstrating.
Look east of there, just on the west side of Lake Michigan there. That's right under,
here.
No, a little east of there even.
Here.
No, east of there. Lake Michigan's there hanging down. Yeah, so right under there
over here.
Over in Wisconsin right there. Yeah, so then down in that end is where the Illinois River comes out, right down there. Yeah.
And you just posted a picture, didn't you, that was taken on our last field trip? I think I saw a picture of me standing in one of the chasms.
Yeah, on Buffalo Island there on the Illinois River, right?
Is that where that? Okay.
Right.
Yeah, and once you start seeing what turbulent water flows, how it erodes various kinds of rocks, it's very distinct, and so you can begin to recognize it in places. And one of the gratifying things is that for me, and I know for Brad too, is the number of people that have commented and saying, "Well, yeah, I've been seeing these landforms for forever, and I just didn't know what I was looking at. Now I can see it," and so that's a big part of what this work is about. It's not only the work of discovering and deciphering and recovering this story that has been lost for 10 or 12,000 years, but also to give people the tools to go out for themselves and to begin to see this stuff and begin to decipher it too, because this is really too big for just a small, like, what do we got here, 5 guys? This is too big for 5 guys. We need hundreds of people out exploring these and thinking about it.
Crowdsourced exploration.
Exactly. Absolutely. Because this is, there are some major scientific stories of our time, but this has to be right up there amongst the top 5 or even top 3. Because these events that happened in this epoch are critical to understanding the world as it is today. Because the world as it is today we have essentially rebuilt the world out of the wreckage of the former world. I mean, very literally, that's the case. So if we want to understand this world, we have to understand the raw material out of which it was built. And we're also confronted with the fact that traditions, not only the hard sciences and the soft sciences, like physics as a hard science and geology as a soft science, or archaeology, but also the idea of traditions that have come down, the legends, the mythology. See, this is something now where we can begin to look at a lot of these traditional accounts that have come down to us through new eyes, and realizing that these aren't just, they're not just fear-based, the unscientific imagination conjuring up these images of how the world was created. Battling of giants, the ice giants in the Norse tradition, the cosmic battles in the sky with dragons, the stories of great floods. See, we're in a position now where we can realize, okay, within that context, within that framework that's been handed down to us, there is real solid information. And we just have to figure out how to extract that information, and realize that, yeah, it's going to have the accretion of centuries and millennia, but within there is valid information that can help to give us deep insight into the history of this planet and what our ancestors, those who came before us on this planet, what they experienced. And then again, the implication is that what's happened before could happen again. One of the things I would quickly like to address is that a lot of folks, I won't say a lot, but there's a share of percentage of them that somehow take this and maybe interpreted it in a negative way, almost like that we're that we're telling some kind of doomsday scenario here. We're making some kind of prediction about the end of the world. And, I've seen comments where people almost have, I'm despairing thinking about this. I don't look at it that way. See, I don't look at it that way at all, because I look at it that, if we come to understand these forces of nature, that's how we can work with them. That's how we can adapt to them. And we have to come to understanding these forces of nature, because these things have happened. This planet has been subjected to ice ages. This planet has been subjected to gigantic volcanic eruptions that could completely destabilize modern civilization. It has been subjected to repeated cosmic impacts, which again is something we're going to be talking in great detail about, because, just what was yesterday, the day before, another space rock flies very close to the Earth. I mean, it's almost happening on a weekly basis now. And the question I have been posing all along, literally, we were talking about this when Brad and I met 22, 23 years ago. Is this just because we now have enhanced technological capabilities that we're seeing stuff that's been flying by all the time? We just didn't have the sensory capabilities of seeing it before. Or is the flux actually becoming enhanced?
Right.
Yeah.
That's a really critical question right there. And the thing is that whatever the answer is, if the answer is, well, this is just the ongoing flux, it's what's been going by us regularly all the time. We just haven't been seeing it. Well, then the question becomes, well, I mean, we've been pretty damn lucky then, that we're not getting pelted more frequently. Then obviously, if the other explanation that the flux is actually becoming more enhanced, that would not bode well for our future. And we need an answer to that kind of question. And I
saw a beautiful post the other day. It may have been from Darren over at Grimerica, but you see these people with the signs and the placards and the sandwich boards saying the end is nigh, the end is near. But this was showing one that said the beginning is near. That's the more optimism that I want to come from. That something may be ending, but that means a new thing is beginning.
Right.
So I love that. The beginning is near.
On the back it says the end is nigh, and on the front it says the beginning is near.
Well,
I have to say those ice sheets look like ice giants to me. On that map you were showing, that's those.
They do, don't they?
Yes, I would say those are ice giants.
Yeah, but the Vikings
yeah.
would have given them better names
Yeah,
than
Laurentide
Laurentide and Cordilleran.
Cordilleran.
I will havoc you.
If you keep mispronouncing Cordilleran. Well, let's get down to some of the research here.
We're about an hour in, just FYI, a little over an hour.
Okay.
Podcast
So-
is over.
See you next week, folks.
This is Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast.